This week we played Dead Cells, an early access roguevania. What? Well, Dead Cells is developed by a company called Twin Motion. I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of them until this game. I believe they must be a somewhat new, I guess you could call them indie developer. Or I said Twin Motion, excuse me. They're Motion Twin. Told you I haven't heard of them. And it's a roguelike and a Metroidvania mashed together. What did you think about it, Chris? First thoughts, opening thoughts.
I thought it was really well done. It's just really well done, right?
Yeah, it's super great. Good use of color. I think that's how they kind of keep it interesting, is that there's always nice glows of rich colors in the background, and you'll notice that as you move through the level, things will brighten and darken to kind of emphasize things.
Yeah, it's like everybody wants to make everything look all dark and scary, but they don't realize how to use color correctly to get that feel without it just being drab.
Right. I mean, it's certainly like the first level that you play, which we'll get into what I mean by that, is it's a prison, like it's a dungeon, but it's not drab and depressing. It's still quite beautiful in its own right, quite colorful and great. So let's get into this roguelike Metroidvania. So it's a roguelike. I think by now most people know what that means. It means usually permadeath, and it means that when you begin the game, it sort of randomly generates all the stages. Now, in the case of this game, there's still levels, kind of like Enter the Gungeon, and those levels have their themes, but their design, their overall, like, this room, that room, this hallway, going up here, here's this ledge, those are randomly created, even though the themes are already in place. So you'll go through levels until you die, and then you'll start over again like a roguelike. But unlike a roguelike, it has Metroidvania elements, and this is where things get really interesting for me. First of all, there's certain upgrades that are permanent, and most of these upgrades have to do with traversal. So you might get the ability to use a certain kind of a portal, or you might get the ability to make a plant grow, so it becomes a vine to climb. And these things are permanent. And when you go back to playing the first randomly generated level, you'll find that those permanent upgrades actually make the level bigger and deeper. That what you thought was just like the simple 5-minute stage is, well, no, it's longer. There's more areas to it. There's things you just couldn't access yet because you hadn't unlocked the Metroidvania side of the traversal of the game. So that's really interesting. I thought that Chris, in full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of roguelikes. I get frustrated by starting from the very beginning.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah. But this gives me... I was hoping it'd let me keep some weapons or some superpowers. It doesn't really do that. But it does make things interesting by making those early levels expand and be more interesting, because your Metroidvania traversal opens them up further the more you play them. So even the early levels become better as you get deeper into your skill sets. And also, what was the other part that I wanted to mention about that? You also, even though every time you play from the beginning, you start off with just a sword, and then you can choose between a shield and a bow and arrow. But as you play through the game, you collect cells, right, from the enemies, and you spend those cells on upgrading the weapons permanently in the game. So, like, let's say there's a type of sword you really like, or I like the double daggers, for example. You can upgrade those, and then next time you find them, they will be better. So they'll be level 2, or they'll be level 3 or 4. And so there is permanent upgrading, even though you have to re-find the weapons. Am I being clear about that, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that gives it a little bit of something for me. So I know that, and if you're smart with at least your early upgrading, then you know, like, what weapons you're going to find quickly, and you can make sure that those are pretty beefed up to get you farther along into the stages. Back to the graphics. The graphics are beautiful, very colorful, very interesting to look at. other stages, you're going to see mostly in this playthrough because we stuck to the early stuff. You're going to see the dungeon. The level 2, you might say, is outdoors. There's kind of a forest background, a lot of spikes in the second level, and then it goes from there. The gameplay. This is where a lot of even modern platformers don't understand that if it doesn't feel good to jump and run around, I ain't gonna play it that long, right?
Yeah, it seems like every one of the brothers trying to make a game kind of like this right now.
Right.
Yeah, doing the whole 8-bit kind of quasi 8-bit, whatever you want to call it. And most people just miss the movement.
Right. And the
control,
movement's so important, yeah. But this one, it nails it. It feels great to jump around. It feels great to traverse. Attacking has a lot of fluid to it. Yeah, they're really smart about what upgrading feels like in this game. You don't feel powerless in the beginning and needing to upgrade just to have fun. You feel pretty empowered right from the start. Upgrading just makes it far more interesting. Finding more interesting weapons, more complex weapons, just make it more interesting. But you don't feel powerless right in the beginning, which some roguelikes, that was the worst thing about starting over, is you just feel totally dumbed down as a character.
They also did a nice job on the animations.
Yeah, right. Everything is...
It's polished.
Yeah, polished is really the word. And it's... I'm definitely going to be looking out for what these guys do next, because... once you find a game company that puts out polished product, then
but this is early access, right?
Yeah, it's early access.
Wow.
So there's a few features it doesn't have. For example, there's some saving features it doesn't have.
It doesn't show your stats yet.
Doesn't show your stats, but that stuff is coming for an early access game. This is early access done right, we should say.
Yeah.
Because early access often so much means less than a beta.
I've played releases that aren't this nice.
Right. As far as weapons go, you always have two, what you might say, repeated use weapons, like a sword. You're not going to run out of ammo. And even your bows and arrows, you don't run out of arrows. They're weapons that you're supposed to use repeatedly. Then you have, you can find replacements for those. And you can also find what I call item weapons, where you're going to use them. So you'll deplete them as you use them, like bombs. Consumables, that's a good word. And so you're generally working with those 4 things, plus special upgrades to the character. Some of them magical, some of them damage related, some of them your own health. And a lot of this stuff, of course, gets rewound back to the beginning if you die. Also, you use cells from enemies, and you have to stay alive until you can spend them. You usually can spend them in between levels, and that's how you permanently upgrade weapons that you can find in the levels. Gold is also collected, and that's used for purchasing things while in a level. So you might purchase a health potion or a better weapon or something like that. And so gold mostly does purchases in levels. Cells do mostly upgrading in between levels. I believe, I could be wrong, I hope I'm not wrong about this, but I believe you keep gold when you die, but you lose all of your cells.
But you just lost 20 cells.
Yeah. But is that all the cells I had?
Well, yeah.
Okay. I think you lose them all, but I could be wrong. I wasn't paying close enough
I think what time
attention
my
to
dice
that.
had lost 20 cells or whatever.
Right.
But I only had 5 or something, so.
Yeah. The enemies are pretty interesting. Obviously, in roguelikes, expect to see the same enemies quite a bit. They upgrade as you get better, as you get deeper into the stages. There are new enemy classes that appear in the stages, especially when you get farther. They get bigger, more intimidating, more in your face, more difficult to deal with. Right now, and what you're seeing right now in the video that we have here, they're pretty tame. There's one enemy type that in the early levels does kind of give you trouble, but what you'll see right here in the video, I'm glad this is happening, is the way they mix it up is not so much by having lots of different kinds of enemies, but adding to those enemies support classes. So there's amidst all these guys, there's this thing giving them a shield, and to deal with them, you got to get that thing first, which I'm about to do, and then then the other guys become easier to attack. And there's that sort of support stuff all throughout the game for the enemies. So even though you might see the same enemies often, they mix it up with having different kind of supports and tweaks to them at any given minute. And I really thought that was a good way of going about it. Instead of having to make it's smart, right? Instead of having to make like 50 different enemies, instead make 20 enemies, but 5 of those are support classes that mix things up quite a bit. Those aren't real numbers. I don't know how many enemies they've made. They've probably made far more than 20. But the idea is you can show variety more than just having to create straight new enemy classes. Instead, you can create variety by how you mix it up with support classes that tweak the other enemies and give them upgrades. There's also, a lot of traversal because that's part of both the roguelike and the Metroidvania style of playing. And the stages themselves have their own traps to deal with, whether it be spikes or some kind of moving spike ball or whatever. And all of this is just really well designed. Now, since it's roguelike, meaning the levels are sort of randomly generated, it's hard to talk about level design. As far as it's hard to talk about level design. And so you can't really, it's a difficult critique. I think for the most part it works in this game. I had a lot of fun exploring. It never, sometimes these roguelikes, these randomly generated levels can be quite boring and boxy and simple, but the levels in this game and Dead Cells get quite complex and deep. You may not be seeing that right now, but that's because at this point in the game, we've not upgraded all the traversal skills yet. So as we do, this level we would discover is actually much deeper, and there's a lot more to see and a lot more special items and treasures to find and other kinds of enemies to run into. So is there anything you want to add to that, Chris?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Yeah. So, Chris, it's been a long time since we did one of these videos, hasn't it?
Yep.
We hopefully can do some more. We had a busy season, especially with our other podcast. But if you recall, the way we usually go about this is we give our vote on whether the people out there watching on YouTube should not purchase this game, or purchase it once it goes on like a Steam sale, or purchase it at full price, or go the extra mile. And we purchased it for $16.99. That's the early access price. I don't know if that will change when it comes a full release or not. But at $16.99, I'll let you give your vote first, Chris.
I think this is a good buy. If you're looking for that feel, the Metroidvania, classic gaming, whatever you want to call it, the great side-scrolling platforming, fighting. If you like this thing, that style, you're gonna love this game, and I think it's a full price buy without a doubt.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think right now, as it is, it's a full price buy guaranteed. I think it's wonderful. The quality is already there. If they upgrade this beyond what it is now, if this has more room to grow and they do more with it, I could see me quickly changing my vote to going the extra mile.
Mm-hmm.
That buy the soundtrack or whatever, go the extra mile, help out the developer, because they're obviously not just trying to push out a product, but they actually have quite a quality idea here that they've polished from top to bottom. So with that, I think we'll close it up, Chris, and see you guys next time on